Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Life Stories. My name is Trent, and as usual, hope you guys are all doing awesome and staying safe. Today, we got some stories coming at you from Reddit/idontworkherelady, as expected. Without further ado though, let's get started. Our first story of the day is titled, I may be wearing scrubs, but I don't work here. Here's another Karen story that happened to my mom as she was attending her doctor's appointment. I wasn't present to witness the whole interaction, but it's my mom's perspective of the interactions. After work, my mom had a doctor's appointment today, and during her visit, she encountered two Karens. Due to COVID-19, her doctor's visit required her to wait outside in her vehicle until the doctor was ready. During her wait, a woman, who we'll call Nice Lady, had pulled into a parking space and dropped off what my mom assumed to be her son, when a car with two elderly women, the Karens, began to pull in, while the mother began to pull out of her parking space to leave. Being a generous person, the Nice Lady pulled back into her space to allow the elderly Karens through, in which the elderly Karens proceeded to block her in and shout profanities at the poor Nice Lady. After they got their fill of spewing profanities at her, they parked in their own space, nearly hitting my mom's truck in the process. A little bit later, my mom then received a text from the doctor giving her the okay to finally go inside. As she was crossing the parking lot, she heard a voice from one of the elderly Karens. There wasn't really an interaction from the second Karen, but here's their interaction. Ma'am, hello, ma'am? Are you talking to me? Can you tell them that Karen is here for her appointment? We don't have our phones. This Karen wasn't exactly being polite to my mom, as she was shouting this whole time at her. I don't work here, my mom said. But you're wearing scrubs! My mom works as a nurse in an emergency care location that also acts as a doctor's office, and she had just gotten off work to attend her doctor's appointment. So I can see how the Karens would have confused her for being one of the nurses at the doctor's office. However, these Karens were noticeably rude from the start, and were still being rude. My mom said, I may be wearing scrubs, but I don't work here. She proceeded to walk into the doctor's office, with the elderly Karens screaming profanities at her. The interaction doesn't end here, though. After checking in, my mom sat in one of the chairs to wait for the doctor to call her in. Her wait would have been for at least 5 minutes or less. In comes the elderly Karens, glaring daggers at my mom, while they proceeded to check in. The nurse was at the front desk, and the first elderly Karen began to make her demands to see the manager. I want to see your manager to discuss one of your employees. The poor nurse began to look confused. Karen turned to point at my mom. Her! I want her fired! She was very rude and ignored me. The nurse peered around her to look at my mom, then back to the elderly Karen, looking even more confused. The nurse said, she doesn't work here. She's one of our patients. That silenced the elderly Karen, who then proceeded to grumble about rude youngsters before taking a seat as far away as she could from my mom. That's the end of my mom's crazy encounter with rude elderly Karens, and the rest of her appointment went smoothly. It's stories like this that make me remember one of my favorite Simpsons quotes from Principal Skinner. Am I out of touch? No. It's the children who are wrong. Moving along, our next story is titled, Visiting a Restaurant When Literally Everything Went Down the Drain. I made a post in the I Do Work Here Lady subreddit where I was surprised by the owner of a restaurant that were much appreciated by the readers, so I thought I would type up another happening in said restaurant, this time for this sub. This story, however, is quite different from what you usually read on here. This happened 10 years ago, in the winter. Me and my friend went to a restaurant to grab some food and a few beers. We got our beers and started with the appetizers, and my friend, the owner, sat down at the table to have a chat. It had been really cold for a long time, and most people stayed home because of it, and the restaurant wasn't actually crowded. The layout of the restaurant is kitchen and bar in one end, and 2 large rooms for the tables. The rooms are separated by a wall, with openings at each end for the waiters to do their rounds. There were a few guests in each room, so like I said, it wasn't crowded. Suddenly, it started dripping water from the ceiling in the other room. Not much, but only a few drops, and they hit a woman in the head. We are quite relaxed in my country, so she simply moved away from the dripping and over to another table. It was cold outside, so it might just be condensation. After a few minutes, it got very clear that that wasn't the issue. We heard a bang, and the pipe from the sprinkler system broke. The water in it had frozen. Water started to flow, and the table they were sitting on was hit directly. The sprinkler system had quite a high pressure to it, and the water kept gushing out, and everyone at the table was getting soaking wet. The guests jumped out of their chairs and to a dry place before they left and went home. The owner and waiters ran around like headless chickens and didn't know what to do. It was complete chaos. My friend that I was with ran, after asking the owner where the water valves were, downstairs and into the valve room, where he turned the water off while I was calling the fire department. They asked me a bunch of questions and I answered the best I could. I explained to them that I don't work here, but somebody needed to take charge of the situation. I was simply a guest. All the guests, of course, went home. Nobody sued anyone, as that's not something we usually do here when accidents happen. Me and my friend sat back down at our table and finished our food and beers while the department sucked all the water up and did damage control. The owner came and sat down with us again, and we talked about what he needed to do if it should happen again. Our food and beers were of course compensated by the owner. Sorry for the lack of Karens. That's the end of that story, and you know what? Sometimes I think it's okay. We can have an I don't work here lady story without a crazy lady. Good to mix it up, you know what I mean? Our next story is titled, Karen Needs Her Very Own Checkout Lane. This happened several years ago. I was shopping at Garden Ridge, which sold household items, decor items, gifts, and craft supplies. It was a huge store with 2 entrances and 2 sets of checkout lanes, one set at each entrance. I was casually shopping when a round woman in her 50s or 60s got right in front of my cart. She glared at me and I tried to go around her, but stopped me again, saying, "You gonna help me or not?" I said, "What?" "I need a register opened so I can check out." I looked at her, astounded. I said, "I don't work here, but there are registers open at the other entrance." To which she replied, "I don't want to walk to those registers. Now open one and check me out." I looked her in the eye and said sternly, "I don't work here." She threw her hands up in the air and started to walk away. As she was walking away, she turned and yelled at me, "This isn't over!" I ignored her. I grabbed the last couple of items I needed and headed to the registers and checkout. I noticed the line was not moving and I could hear that awful woman's voice. She was arguing with a cashier. The cashier called a manager. Other people waiting in line were getting impatient, and it was showing. The manager arrived and instructed the cashier to open another register so that the rest of us, the sane people, could check out. "How come you open a register for them and not for me?" the awful woman yelled at the manager. He replied, "Ma'am, you're at an open register now. What can I help you with?" "I wanted a register opened at the other door, and one of your workers refused to do it." She kept babbling nonsense. I raised my hand and got the manager's attention. The awful woman looked over at me, the same time the manager did. "It was her! She wouldn't open a register for me. Then she lied and said she didn't work here," shouted the awful woman. "Ma'am, she doesn't work here," the manager said. "Are you going to help me or not?" she yelled. "I'm trying to help you, ma'am, but you haven't asked for something that I can help you with. If you want to check out, then I'll check you out." The awful woman huffed and puffed and started angrily putting her items on the counter. I was nearly done paying for my items at the other checkout lane when she was done paying for hers. The manager handed her the receipt and told her to have a nice day. As the awful woman was walking towards the door, she paused and shouted, "I guess customer service is dead here." The manager shouted back, "Ma'am, you can call corporate and get it out of your system. I'm not going to allow you to disrespect me or my staff." "Oh, I'm definitely calling corporate, and I'm telling them everything that happened here today," she yelled. I was walking past her and said to her, "I'm sure that'll be rich. Tell them you need to have your own personal checkout lane while you're at it." She looked at me, red-faced and shaking, and yelled, "I plan on it!" Then took off, following the sidewalk around the building as I walked to my car. I was still in shock that someone could be so awful. Hey, big respect to the manager here. It's always nice to see one step in and shut the Karen down when they really need to be shut down, you know what I mean? At least it's a lot better than all the stories we've heard of the OP getting fake fired so the manager can save face. Anyway, with that story out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, we are all out of time for today's episode. As usual, guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning into Life Stories. You know how this goes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Reddit content coming your way. My name is Trent, and I hope to see you guys soon.